In the midst of a raging interstellar war, chaos filled the battlefield as explosions rocked the sky and blaster fire rang out in all directions. Commander Daniel Carter, a seasoned human soldier, advanced steadily through the thick cloud of smoke and dust. The sound of enemy engines and distant cries of pain filled his ears, yet his focus was unshaken. Amid the turmoil, his keen eyes spotted a figure lying on the scorched ground, a sight that struck him with both shock and urgency. The figure was unlike any enemy he had seen before. It was an alien, but not one of the mindless invaders he was told to fear. This being was graceful even in distress, with deep blue skin that shimmered in the fading light and eyes that held a spark of royal dignity. It was Tyra, the revered queen of the Zerrin Empire, now wounded and abandoned on the battlefield. Her once regal attire was torn and stained with blood, and she struggled to breathe. Without a second thought, Daniel rushed to her side. His fellow soldiers shouted warnings, urging him to retreat to safety, but he could not leave her behind. No human had ever shown mercy to a queen of the enemy, yet his heart told him that compassion was stronger than fear. Kneeling beside Xyra, he gently checked her injuries and offered her a reassuring smile. Even in pain, she gave a weak nod of acknowledgement. Daniel carefully lifted the injured queen onto his back, feeling her weight and the fragile pulse of life within her. Every step he took was filled with danger, as enemy forces closed in on his position. Still, he moved with determination, using the debris and ruined walls as cover. The battlefield around him was a symphony of destruction, but his focus remained solely on the queen he had sworn to protect. In a hidden clearing behind a crumbled wall, Daniel paused to catch his breath. There, away from the relentless conflict, he tended to Xyra's wounds using basic medical supplies. As he worked, the queen's eyes slowly opened wider, meeting his gaze with a mix of pain and gratitude. In that quiet moment, two souls from very different worlds shared an unspoken connection, one forged by the simple act of kindness in the midst of war. Daniel did not know that this brave act would set the stage for a future of unexpected alliances and profound change. His compassion for an enemy queen had planted the seeds of hope that could one day unite their warring peoples. In the heart of battle, a new chapter was beginning, a chapter where courage and empathy could light the way through the darkest times. Daniel felt that this moment was a spark in the dark, a sign that his kindness could change not just one life, but many. With every heartbeat, hope grew stronger, and the future seemed less certain yet full of possibility. His journey was just beginning. The war had begun. In the hidden shelter of an abandoned outpost on a distant planet, Daniel gently laid Xyra on a makeshift bed. The room was dim and dusty, with only the quiet hum of distant machinery breaking the silence. Outside, the sounds of war, blaster fire, and distant explosions reminded him that danger was never far away. Yet here, for a short while, time seemed to slow down, giving him a chance to focus on saving a life. Daniel began by carefully cleaning Xyra's wounds with water he had managed to collect. Each movement was slow and deliberate, as he did not want to cause her more pain. His hands, though rough from years of battle, moved with surprising tenderness. "I am here to help you heal," he said softly in simple words, hoping she could understand even if their languages were different. Xyra's eyes, deep and golden, watched him with a mix of pain and quiet wonder. In that moment, the proud alien queen, usually so fierce and untouchable, appeared vulnerable and human. As Daniel worked, he explained his actions in clear, basic English. He told her that the injuries were serious, but that they could be treated if given time and care. With every bandage he wrapped and every wound he cleaned, a bond began to form between them. Tyra listened, her thoughts turning over in her mind. She had been taught that humans were ruthless and heartless, but now she saw something very different. Here was a human who risked everything to save her, an enemy who showed unexpected kindness. Hours passed slowly as Daniel continued his careful work. He shared simple stories of Earth, a world of green fields, blue skies, and hope that seemed so distant from the harsh realities of war. Thyra listened intently, her eyes softening with each story. The idea of a peaceful world was new to her, a place where even enemies could show mercy. She felt a stirring of emotions that were both confusing and hopeful, emotions that she had never allowed herself to feel before. Outside the shelter, the war raged on, but inside, the two survivors were building a quiet refuge. Daniel kept one eye on the door, alert for any sign of danger, while his other hand continued to tend to her wounds. In those moments of shared silence and gentle conversation, the queen and the soldier began to see each other not as enemies, but as two individuals caught in a moment of crisis. Thyra wondered if this act of compassion might be the start of something greater, a chance to bridge the divide between their warring peoples. Daniel, too, felt that his choice to save her was more than just an act of duty. It was a step toward a future where differences could be overcome. In that small, quiet outpost, amidst the echoes of battle, a spark of hope was lit, a spark that promised change and the possibility of peace. Daniel and Sarah slipped out of the hidden shelter as night fell over the ruined city. The distant sound of explosions and the crackle of energy weapons filled the dark sky. They knew that danger was close. Both human soldiers and Zarian warriors were searching for them. Daniel had been branded a traitor, and Sarah was a high-value target as the queen of the Zarian Empire. Now they had to run fast and work together if they were to survive. They moved quietly along a narrow alleyway, using the shadows as cover. The streets were filled with rubble from destroyed buildings, and every step was filled with uncertainty. Daniel led the way, his eyes alert for any sign of enemy patrols. Thyra followed closely, her head low as she listened to the soft footsteps behind them. Although they came from worlds that were once enemies, they now shared the same fear, the fear of being caught. The sound of heavy boots and the hum of energy shields soon reached their ears. Daniel signaled for Thyra to hide behind a collapsed wall. They crouched low, holding their breath as a patrol of Zarian soldiers passed by. The soldiers' armor glowed softly in the dim light, and their voices were low and harsh as they searched the area. Once the patrol moved on, Daniel and Sarah continued their escape. In the chaos of the ruined city, the two found an old service tunnel that might lead them to safety. The tunnel entrance was hidden under a pile of debris. Daniel and Sarah worked together to clear a small path. It was hard work, and every minute spent there increased the chance of being discovered. Yet the bond they had started to form gave them strength. Thyra, despite her royal pride, showed a willingness to learn and help. Daniel admired her determination and saw that she was more than just a queen. She was a brave individual who could adapt. Inside the tunnel, the air was cool and damp. The narrow passageway was lined with old pipes and broken tiles. As they moved deeper, the sound of the ongoing war outside faded, replaced by the echo of their own footsteps. They paused for a moment to listen. In that silence, they exchanged a few simple words about their past lives and dreams of peace. Daniel spoke of his home on Earth, where hope and love still existed despite the scars of war. Thyra listened quietly, her eyes softening as she imagined a life beyond conflict. Their journey through the tunnel was not easy. At one point, they had to climb over a fallen beam, and another time, they had to squeeze through a narrow gap in the wall. Each challenge made them more careful and closer as allies. They began to trust each other more, realizing that survival depended on cooperation. As they finally saw a faint light at the end of the tunnel, both felt a surge of hope. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Together, Daniel and Sarah stepped forward into the unknown, their hearts set on finding a safe place, and perhaps a future where old enemies could find new friendship. Daniel and Sarah finally found a safe place to rest. They reached an old abandoned station, hidden behind thick vines and rusted metal walls. Inside, soft light filtered through broken windows. The quiet of the station was a stark contrast to the noise of the battle outside. Here they could take a moment to recover and learn more about each other. Daniel sat on a dusty metal bench, while Xyra leaned against a crumbling wall. The silence between them was gentle, as if the station itself invited calm. Daniel broke the quiet by saying, "I want to know about your world. Tell me about the Zerin Empire." His voice was soft and kind. Xyra looked at him with surprise. No one had ever asked her that before. Slowly, Xyra began to speak. She explained that the Zerin Empire was a vast collection of planets ruled by strong traditions and honor. She described the golden cities and the great space fleets that defended her people. Xyra told him that her world valued duty and strength, and that each citizen was taught to fight for the honor of the empire. As she spoke, her eyes shone with pride and sadness at the cost of war. Daniel listened carefully. He shared stories of Earth, a small blue planet far from the stars, where people believed in hope and the power of love. He spoke of cities filled with bright lights and of vast green fields that stretched under a blue sky. Daniel explained that Earth was a place where differences could be set aside if people worked together. His words were simple, yet full of feeling. Xyra asked many questions. "What do you believe in, Daniel?" she asked, her voice soft. "I believe that even in war, there is a chance to change the future," he replied. Daniel talked about how humans valued life and freedom. He told her of families, friends, and dreams that could be shared even in the darkest moments. His words painted a picture of a world that was small but full of heart. As the evening passed, both began to understand that their worlds were very different yet strangely alike. Xyra learned that Earth was not weak, even though its people were not built for war. Daniel saw that the Zerin were not heartless monsters, but a people who carried great responsibility for their empire. They spoke slowly and simply, each word building a bridge between their two lives. In that quiet station, Daniel and Xyra wrote down their thoughts in a small notebook they found in a dusty drawer. They wrote about hopes for peace and dreams of a future where their people could live together. The conversation was not easy. There were moments of pain as they recalled memories of loss and conflict. But each shared story made them feel a little closer, a little less alone in the vast, broken universe. By the time night fell fully, a new understanding had grown between them. They knew that learning about each other was the first step to building a better future, a future where old enemies might find friendship and hope could overcome even the deepest wounds. In the quiet light of dawn, a new day began inside the abandoned station. Xyra, once proud and distant, now sat quietly on a worn metal bench beside Daniel. The soft glow of morning filtered through the broken windows, and the gentle sound of a distant breeze filled the silence. For the first time in many years, the Queen felt a change stirring within her. The events of the past days had left a mark that even her royal pride could not ignore. Xyra remembered the moment she first saw Daniel on the battlefield. At that time, she had felt anger and deep mistrust. He was a human, a member of a species she had been taught to fear and despise. But as she lay wounded, he risked everything to save her. His careful hands had tended to her injuries, and his kind eyes had shown her a compassion she never thought possible. Slowly, the cold walls around her heart began to melt. In the quiet hours of recovery, she started to see Daniel not as an enemy, but as a brave soul with a gentle spirit. As the morning grew brighter, Xyra walked over to a shattered window and looked out at the ruined world beyond the station walls. The devastation of war was visible everywhere: broken structures, twisted metal, and the scars of conflict on the land. Yet in that destruction, she sensed the faint promise of new beginnings. It was as if nature itself was whispering that even in the worst of times, hope could take root. With every step she took, the burden of her responsibilities felt a little lighter, and her mind filled with thoughts of change. Inside, Daniel noticed a different look in Xyra's eyes. When he was busy fixing a damaged piece of old equipment, he caught her gaze from across the room. There was a softness in her stare that had not been there before. He understood that her view of the world was shifting. Once she had seen humans as violent and cruel, but now she saw the strength of their kindness. He felt a spark of hope that maybe their two very different worlds could find a path to peace. Later that day, Tyra returned to the bench where Daniel waited patiently. In simple, sincere words, she said, "I was wrong about humans. I thought you were only cruel, but you have shown me a new way." Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke, and for a moment, both of them shared a quiet understanding. Daniel's heart swelled with the knowledge that their connection was real, and that their actions could lead to change for both their peoples. In that peaceful moment, the Queen made a silent promise to herself. She would use her power not for endless conflict, but to explore a future where peace was possible. With Daniel by her side, she dared to dream of a world where former enemies might become friends. The transformation in her heart was complete. A soft light of hope now shone where suspicion and fear once reigned. The peace inside the abandoned station did not last long. By midday, the distant hum of approaching aircraft sent a wave of tension through Daniel and Tyra. The Zerine military had found them. The Queen's people had come to take her back, whether she wanted to go or not. Daniel grabbed his weapon and peeked through the cracks in the station's wall. Sleek, silver crafts hovered above the ruined city, scanning the area with bright searchlights. His heart pounded. If the Zerine forces saw them together, they would assume he had taken their queen hostage. There would be no chance to explain. "We need to move," Daniel said, turning to Xyra. But Xyra didn't move. She stood still, her golden eyes locked onto the ships above. A strange expression crossed her face, one of deep conflict. For the first time in her life, she hesitated to return to her people. Would they understand the truth? That a human had saved her, not harmed her? Or would they see her as weak for accepting his help? Daniel saw the struggle in her eyes and spoke gently. "I'll help you escape if that's what you want. But if you want to go back, I won't stop you." Sarah turned to him, surprised. In her world, warriors did not ask for permission. They took what they wanted. Yet here was a human, giving her the freedom to choose. She hesitated, her voice uncertain for the first time. Before she could answer, the ground shook as a Zerine dropship landed near the station. Soldiers in dark blue armor stepped out, weapons raised. A commanding officer shouted, "By order of the Zerine Empire, surrender the Queen." Daniel clenched his jaw. He knew that fighting them was suicide. He also knew that if they took Xyra away, he would never see her again. To his shock, Xyra stepped forward. Her posture was regal, her voice steady. "Lower your weapons," she commanded. "I am not a prisoner." The soldiers hesitated, confused. "But your Majesty," one of them started. "I was saved by this human," Xyra continued. "He is not our enemy." The commanding officer's eyes narrowed. "A human. You expect us to believe he did not take you captive?" Xyra's voice grew sharper. "I expect you to obey your queen." A tense silence followed. The soldiers looked at each other, uncertain. The Zerine Empire had never considered humans as anything more than a threat. Could they accept that one had risked his life to save their queen? Daniel remained silent, watching the moment unfold. His fate rested in Xyra's hands. After what felt like an eternity, the officer finally gave a reluctant nod. "As you command, Your Majesty." Xyra exhaled, then turned to Daniel. Her eyes held something he had never seen before, a silent promise. "Come with me," she said softly. Daniel knew this decision would change everything. But as he met her gaze, he realized he had already made his choice. He took her hand. Together, they stepped forward into the unknown. "You said," as Daniel stepped onto the Zerine dropship with Xyra. He felt the heavy stares of the alien soldiers around him. Their glowing eyes were filled with suspicion and silent hostility. To them, he was still an enemy, a human who did not belong among them. But Sarah stood tall beside him, her presence commanding respect. No one dared to question her openly, but he could feel their unease. The ship's engines roared to life, and within moments they were lifted into the sky, leaving the ruins of the battlefield behind. Daniel gazed out of the small window, watching as the war-torn planet faded beneath them. His heart pounded. He was now stepping into the heart of the Zerrin Empire, a place where no human had ever set foot voluntarily. Zyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. Daniel met her gaze. "I made my choice," he replied. "I trust you." Zyra's eyes softened for a moment before she looked away. She had expected him to hesitate, to be afraid. But he was different. He was not like the warrior she had known, who fought for power and conquest. He fought for something else, something she was only beginning to understand. After a tense silence, the dropship landed inside a massive Zerrin war cruiser. The doors opened, revealing a grand hall with towering silver columns and banners of the Empire hanging from the high ceiling. Soldiers lined the path, standing at attention as their queen stepped forward. Daniel followed, feeling the weight of countless eyes on him. At the end of the hall stood General Varkos, Zyra's most loyal military commander. He was tall, with dark armor and piercing violet eyes that burned with authority. As soon as he saw Daniel, his expression darkened. "Your Majesty," Varkos said, bowing deeply. "We are relieved to see you alive. But why is there a human standing beside you?" Zyra raised her chin. "This human saved my life. Without him, I would not be here." A murmur spread through the hall. The idea of a human saving their queen was unthinkable. Varkos' sharp gaze locked onto Daniel. "Humans are our enemies," he said firmly. "This one cannot be trusted." Daniel remained silent, knowing that anything he said would not change their minds. But Zyra took a step forward. "Enough," she said, her voice strong. "I decide who is a threat to me, and I say this human is my ally." The tension in the hall grew thick. Varkos clenched his jaw, but did not argue further. He bowed his head slightly. "As you command, Your Majesty." Zyra turned to Daniel and gave him a small nod. He had taken his first step into her world, but the battle for acceptance had only just begun. As he followed her deeper into the grand halls of the Zerrin Empire, he knew that his real fight was still ahead. And this time, it was not just for survival. It was for a future where humans and Zerrin could stand together. Daniel followed Zyra through the towering halls of the Zerrin war cruiser, feeling the weight of every stare on him. The alien soldiers and officials lining the passage whispered in hushed tones, their distrust clear in their glowing eyes. No human had ever stepped foot in their domain without being a prisoner. Yet here he was, walking beside their queen as her guest, or something more. Zyra led him to a private chamber, away from the prying eyes of her people. The room was grand, with high ceilings and intricate silver carvings on the walls. A large circular window overlooked the vastness of space, the distant glow of a nebula casting a soft light inside. She turned to face him, her golden eyes studying his expression. "You are in great danger here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "My people do not trust humans. They see you as a threat." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I figured that much," he said with a small smirk. "Your general looked like he wanted to throw me out of an airlock." Zyra's lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile he had seen from her. "Varkos is loyal to the Empire. He does not understand why I defend you." She took a step closer, her tone softening. "But I do." For a moment, there was silence between them, filled only by the distant hum of the ship's engines. Daniel looked into her eyes and saw something different, something deeper than gratitude. She wasn't just protecting him because he had saved her. There was something else, something unspoken. Then the door to the chamber slid open, breaking the moment. General Varkos entered, his presence commanding as ever. His violet eyes flickered between them before he spoke. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight with disapproval, "the High Council demands an explanation for your actions." His gaze shifted to Daniel with open hostility. "They question your judgment in bringing a human aboard." Zira straightened, her royal authority returning in full force. The council does not command me. I will address them when I see fit. Varkos's jaw tightened. You are placing your position at risk. For a moment, tension filled the room. Daniel stood quietly, knowing this was Xyra's battle to fight. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm but unwavering. Then let them question me, she said, and let them hear my answer. Varkos hesitated but then nodded stiffly. He turned and left the chamber without another word. Daniel exhaled. That didn't sound good. Xyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. It means I must make a choice, she admitted. One that will change my future, and yours. Daniel didn't know what she meant, but he could feel the shift in the air. Something big was coming, something that would determine both their fates. And he had a feeling it was only the beginning. Xyra stood tall in the grand chamber of the Zerin High Council, her golden eyes calm but sharp. The council members, powerful rulers of the empire, sat in a circular formation around her, their faces tense with disapproval. At the center of it all, standing alone, was Daniel. He could feel their piercing gazes, the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a crushing force. A council elder, an aged Zerin with silver skin and deep-set eyes, spoke first. Your Majesty, this human does not belong here. He is an enemy, a threat to our empire. Murmurs of agreement spread across the room. Daniel clenched his fists but remained silent. He had known from the start that convincing them would be impossible. Xyra, however, did not flinch. This human saved my life, she said firmly. Without him, I would not be standing here before you today. Another council member scoffed. A single act does not erase centuries of conflict. Xyra stepped forward, her presence commanding. And yet not once in those centuries have we seen a human act with such selflessness. Not once have we considered the possibility that our enemies are more than what we believe them to be. The room fell silent. Even General Varkos, who stood beside the council, seemed momentarily taken aback by her words. Xyra continued, her voice unwavering. I have seen with my own eyes that humans are not the monsters we were taught to believe. They are strong, they are courageous, and they possess something that we have long forgotten, the ability to change. Daniel watched her, his heart pounding. She was fighting for him, for his right to be seen as more than just an enemy. He had risked his life to save her, but now she was risking everything for him. One of the elders leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. What do you propose, Your Majesty? A deep breath. Then, the words that would change everything. I propose an alliance, Xyra declared. A new future where humans and Zerin are not enemies, but partners. Shock rippled through the council. The idea was unthinkable. An alliance with humans, the very thought was unheard of. You risked the Empire's stability, Varkos warned, his voice controlled but firm. I risk nothing but my own fate, Xyra replied. She turned to Daniel, her expression unreadable. And for that, I have made my decision. She took a step closer to him. Then, in front of the council, in front of her entire empire, she spoke the words no one expected. I will make this alliance personal. I will take this human as my consort. A stunned silence followed. No one moved. No one breathed. Daniel's heart stopped. He had thought she was defending him as an ally. But now she had proposed marriage. And with that, the entire galaxy would never be the same again. A stunned silence filled the grand chamber. The council members sat frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Even General Varkos, who rarely showed emotion, looked momentarily speechless. The idea of their queen, a ruler of the mighty Zerin Empire, choosing the human as her consort was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Daniel felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He had come here expecting hostility, maybe even death. But marriage. His heart pounded as he met Xyra's golden eyes. She stood tall, unwavering, as if daring anyone to challenge her. The silence broke as one of the elder council members rose to his feet. His voice was sharp with disbelief. "You cannot be serious, Your Majesty. A human, marrying a Zerrin queen. This is unheard of." Zyra did not flinch. "Then it is time for something new to be heard," she replied, her voice steady. "We have fought for centuries, but where has it led us? To endless war, destruction, and loss. We have seen what humans are capable of, but we have never given them a chance to be more than our enemies." Another council member shook his head in frustration. "This decision could divide the Empire. Many will not accept a human as consort." Zyra took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "Then let them challenge me," she declared. "Let them test my decision. But I will not change my mind." Daniel finally found his voice. "Zyra, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. She turned to him, her gaze softening. "You risked your life for me when you had no reason to," she said. "You showed me that humans are more than warriors, more than enemies. You showed me kindness, courage, and hope. If there is any being in this galaxy I would trust to stand beside me, it is you." Daniel swallowed hard. His mind screamed that this was impossible, that he was just a soldier caught in something far greater than himself. But deep in his heart, he knew that he had already made his choice. He had chosen to save her, to stand by her side, to believe in something bigger than war. And now she had chosen him. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Then I will stand with you." Gasps filled the chamber. The council erupted in whispers, some in anger, some in disbelief. But Zyra smiled, a rare, genuine smile that held the weight of a new beginning. General Varkos stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he bowed his head slightly. "Then may the stars have mercy on us all." The decision was made. The war between humans and Zerrin was no longer about battles and bloodshed. It was now about change, unity, and the hope of a future where two worlds could finally come together. And it all began with a single choice.